Hello and welcome to today's live. And here's a very interesting way to start this off. Right? I hear a lot of executives and entrepreneurs tell me, I feel fine. Should I really be worried? And to give you an example of this, I had a client called Saurav. So he's roughly around 48, CFO of a company, and he had just come out of his annual health check. And the doctor had used a word that he wasn't particularly fond of. He used the word pre-diabetic to describe my client Saurav. Now, I have actually heard that exact sentence from executives almost all the time. Right? I've heard them say, I feel fine, although I'm pre-diabetic or even diabetic. So should I really be worried? Now, before we go any further, what you need to know is that I am not a doctor. My name is Samarth. I run Growing Young, and we help busy executives and entrepreneurs over the age of 40 not just beat lifestyle diseases, but more importantly, come up with routines to manage them when they have them and get rid of them over time. Right? And when I am speaking to clients like Saurav, here is generally what I tell them. I tell them that feeling fine is not all the clear or not the best idea to think of when you're coming to health, or not use it as the right measurement when it comes to thinking about good health, because feeling fine is exactly what it looks like from the inside for about 10 years, right? And similarly for Saurabh, he was right? He was right that nothing hurt. Nothing had really stopped working. He was traveling, he was closing deals, he was performing at the top of his field. And he was also years into something that had already changed his body. Now, both of those things were true at the same time. And this is what we're going to be talking about this morning, right? Last time we sat here, we spent the whole hour on the liver, right? And if you missed it, there is one line from that session that you need today. The liver has no pain nerves. It can actually not tell you when something is going wrong. It just keeps going quietly. And by the time you feel something, it has usually been happening for years before you felt it. And we said one more thing that day. We said that fatty liver is not a liver problem, it is a storage problem that shows up in the liver. Now, the liver is not broken. In fact, it's safe to say that the liver is the last man standing. Sugar keeps arriving, and somewhere in the body, the place that was supposed to take that sugar actually just stopped existing. Right? Whatever that storage space to take sugar stopped existing. So now the liver does its job, and it turns that extra that comes into the liver into fat and stores it. Now, obviously, this is an oversimplification of what happens, but this is just a quick recap of what we went through last week. Now, the question is, if that is what happens at the end of the story, the obvious question is what happened at the start? What stopped taking the sugar for the sugar to actually start going and settling, whether it's in the liver or in the blood? And that's what we're going to be speaking about today. We go one step back from the organ to the thing that made the organ that way. And that thing is insulin. Now, let me explain insulin in the simplest way I can. Now, sugar cannot walk into your cells on its own. And why does sugar go into your cells in the first place? To give you energy, right? Sugar cannot walk into your cell on its own. The door of the cell has to be opened for it. And insulin is essentially what opens that door. And that is more or less, on a simplified version, the whole job of insulin, right? Now, insulin resistance means that the door has become heavier to open. So, what does a fully functioning body do? It sends more men, right? It sends more insulin. And if one man cannot push that door open, it sends four. And if four cannot do it, it sends 10. And here is the part that everybody misses. It works, right? Your body pushing out more insulin to open the door of your cells for sugar to go in to give you energy. It works, right? The door opens, the sugar goes in, your reports come back normal for a very long period of time. But until your reports get messed up and you get a title like, let's say, pre-diabetes or diabetes, nobody has spent time counting on how much insulin it actually took to open the doors over the last couple of years when things were about to go wrong, not have already gone wrong. And that is the whole problem right here. The test you get every year, fasting sugar and maybe HbA1c, it only looks at the door. It tells you that the door opened, and it tells you nothing about how hard it was to open that door. So your report generally says normal, 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 then borderline. And you sit there at 48 thinking that this started maybe this year or a couple of years ago. It actually didn't start this year. This year is just the year your body started running out of men. And I want to be very clear about one thing, because this is where most people relax, right? When you see that, you're putting on a little bit of the waist, you're not really increasing in weight, you're eating whatever you want, you're living the lifestyle that you want to, a lot of the time your body is actually sending extra men to open these doors. And those extra men are not standing around quietly all the time, right? High insulin does things. It tells your body to store fat, and it actually makes that fat much harder to burn. It pushes your liver to make more fat. It pushes your triglycerides to go up, and it even pushes your blood pressure up. So, this is not a waiting room, right? This is not watch it and come back next year. Something is already happening. Now, when clients like Saurav ask me, should I be worried? My honest answer is not yes, and it is not no. My answer is this. You are not you are not at the start of this. You are actually in the middle, and the middle is the cheapest place you will ever stand. Now, let me make this useful because most of you have the proof already sitting in your blood tests or your emails. I'm going to give you 5 things to look at, and no single one of them proves anything on their own. But together, they tell you a story, right? So go and pull up your reports after this call and check them. The first thing that you would like to check, that is outside your report, by the way, is your waist. Not your weight, but your waist. Now, your weight can stay the same for 10 years while everything underneath changes, right? So, muscle may leave, fat may arrive, and the scale may not move. So, your trouser size generally knows things your weighing scale does not. And if your waist has gone up 2 sizes in 10 years and your weight has barely moved, that is a good signal. And generally, if you're Indian or at least Southeast Asian, this matters more, not less. Right, at the same weight, at the same BMI, our bodies tend to carry more fat around the organs and less muscle, which is why this shows up in us earlier, right? And at lower body weights than the numbers you generally read in Western studies. Now, this was the first point, but what about the second? The second one is your triglycerides, and specifically your triglycerides sitting next to your HDL. Now, most of you look at total cholesterol and stop there. Go back and look at those two together. When your triglycerides are climbing and your HDL is drifting down, that pair is let's say, a good enough way to show that insulin may be working a little bit over time. Now, both numbers are already on your report, but nobody would have ever walked you through them together. And having said that, the third way is to find the fatty liver on your scan that you may have filed away or forgotten. Grade 1, mild. Right? You were told it's very common, and to be honest, it is common. But common is not the same as normal. And as we said last time, that finding the problem is just the evidence of it. It is not just solving the problem. Right. But with that being said, another great measure, which brings us to the fourth one, is our HbA1c. And No, I don't just mean this year's number, right? I mean the last 3 years side by side, right? It could be 5.3, 5.7, and then 5.7, and then all of a sudden 5.9, right? Every single one of those was reported to you within a range or borderline a couple of months or years back, but you weren't able to watch it. So watch it now. And every year you may have been told not to worry, which may have been correct because it will not kill you, but it's completely useless on the standpoint on reversing this entire issue, right? Because the direction is always the information. If you pull out 3 years of reports and lay them next to each other, that takes roughly 10 minutes and it will get you more insight to your body than you trying to listen to your body. Because I hear this nonsense a lot of the times when people say that, oh, I listen to my body. How did you get diabetes then? Did your body tell you to get diabetes? Of course not. Right? And I actually have a huge problem with the statement listen to your body, which is only if you know what it means should you listen to your body. A random person just thinking, oh wow, I feel great. Like druggies feel like they're listening to their bodies when they're doing drugs. And although that is a terribly extreme example for me to give, that is generally what people are when it comes to things like sugar and food. They just don't want to admit it. But completely sidetracking, coming back to the fifth one, is the one your report probably doesn't have, right? Your fasting insulin. Your fasting insulin or your fasting sugar in general, what people call it, of course, those are slightly different, but in general, when people say fasting sugar, it tells you the doors opened, right? Fasting sugar tells you the doors have opened, but fasting insulin tells you how many men it took to open that door. And it is, let's say, one of the better tests, right, in this list that helps you look at the effort instead of the result. It helps you look at how difficult it was for your body to open the door as opposed to showing you whether the door is opened or closed. And it is generally cheap, right? It is available everywhere, but it is almost never included into a standard blood panel. So if you are looking for something like that, make sure to actually add that manually onto your blood panel, especially if you're in India. Right, so ask for fasting insulin along with your fasting glucose. Your doctor is more likely to get you a better diagnosis by reading them together, anyways. Now, to the actual question in the title of this life, every one of you has been told the same three things, right? When it comes to pre-diabetes or even fatty liver, cut sugar, cut rice, cut sweets. And it isn't wrong. It's just a very small answer to a much bigger question. Right? Think about it like this. Sugar coming into your body is the supply side. And that is all most people talk about. But nobody talks about the demand side. Right? What happened to your body's ability to use what comes in? In fact, four things happened. And not one of them is actually on your plate. Right? The first one and the biggest one is that you lost the place the sugar was supposed to go. Now, where is that place? That place is actually your muscle. Your muscle is where most of the sugar from a meal is meant to end up. Muscle is the tank. That is where it gets stored and used. But from your mid 30s onwards, if you're not training, you lose muscle every year, quietly, a little at a time. And you don't notice because your weight does not change. Fat moves in and it takes the space of the muscle that you've just lost. So picture it. The tank of muscle is getting smaller every single year. And the truck is arriving with the same load of sugar every single day. So where does this go? Right? It goes into the liver, it goes into your waist, it goes into your bloodstream. So you didn't develop a sugar problem. You actually developed a storage problem, and the sugar had nowhere left to go, right? But the second factor that really influences this is sleep, because short sleep makes your body handle sugar worse, not over years. Actually, it happens within days, and this has been shown in multiple studies, including healthy young people. Right, so if you've been sleeping 5.5 hours for 11 years and calling it discipline, your body has been calling it something else. Which brings me to my third point, which is travel and timing. Now, your body runs on a clock, right? The same meal is not handled the same way at 11 in the night versus 8 in the morning, right? Your body is simply better at it earlier in the day. Of course, due to your circadian rhythm, but more importantly, because when you eat food very close to your sleep, it tends to disrupt the recovery process that sleep is actually known for, right? And this is something that you want to keep in mind, right? But when I say this, I want you also to think about your last 6 weeks, right? If you're somebody who travels different time zones, dinner at 9:30 because that's where the meeting ended, airport food at hours your body never agreed to, you haven't just been eating badly. In fact, you may have been to a large extent eating wrong. And the fourth one, which is a huge contributor to why most people eat wrong, is stress. And I mean the specific kind of stress that you have, especially as an entrepreneur or executive, right? When you're under stress, your body's job is to put sugar into your blood so that you can run and fight as if you're being chased by a predator. That is very useful when the danger is physical, and it is very useful when the danger ends. But today, in your brain, in my brain, our dangers are a board meeting. So it doesn't end, and we do not move. So the sugar in our blood goes up, nothing burns it, and insulin just has to come and clean it up again and again and again for years. So, stress in your job is not just making you tired, it is actually doing something negative in terms of the way your body handles sugar. Now, if you put all those four together and you look at actually what happened to, for example, clients like Saurav, he did not lose control of his diet. In fact, he was roughly eating the same at 48 as he was at 35. What changed was actually everything around it. He lost 12 years worth of muscle. He lost 2 hours of sleep every night, and he added hundreds of flights, right? The and that built the kind of pressure that keeps sugar in the blood with nothing to burn it. So the sugar essentially stayed the same. His ability to handle it did not. And that is why sugar is never the whole story. So what do you actually do about it? Right? Inside the life that you actually have. Now, I'm not going to give you a full protocol on a Sunday morning, right? On a Sunday morning, because it's a Sunday morning. But I will give you the order of importance because the order is where most people go wrong. One, build muscle, highest order. Two, fix your sleep, second highest order. Three, fix your timing. And four, get the right tests. That is the sequence. And remember, this is a sequence, it is not a menu, right? Because most people start at four, do a little bit of three, and never get anywhere near one. Now, let me take them one at a time. Let's start with point number one, build muscle. Everything else comes after this. Resistance training at 48 is not about how you look, it is about the only thing that gives you back the place that sugar is supposed to go. It is the biggest unused lever in your body, and it is the one almost every executive skips because they like walking, right? But having said that, let's move to point number two, which is fix your sleep and treat it like treatment. Treat it like medication because it is. If you can't get the perfect 8 hours, just a steady, boring 7 would do. But remember, your body cares far more about consistency than it does about heroics. Right? Which brings me to point 3. Fix your timing. When you eat, don't just think about what you're eating. Think about how you can avoid eating anything at least 4.5 hours before going to bed, because that will make your sleep far more fruitful. Which brings me to point 4, right? Get the tests that show you the effort. Fasting insulin, not just the result, like fasting sugar, right? Fasting insulin along with your fasting sugar, triglycerides that read next to your HDL, waist, your waist tracked, and 3 years of HbA1c generally side by side. And to be very clear, none of this replaces your doctor, but all of it makes your next conversation with your doctor a far more fruitful conversation. So let me finish where we started. I told Saurav that feeling fine was not the wrong thing to notice. It was just the wrong instrument to measure progress. Now you know what it was actually measuring, right? A body working extremely hard to keep one number on the report looking normal and succeeding right up until it couldn't. And that is genuinely good news if you catch it there. Because everything that I've talked about this morning, muscle, sleep, timing, stress, is about capacity. And capacity is one of the few things that you can still build at 48, 52, or even at 58, right? It's never too late. Now, the reports that are drifting today, I want you to remember that they are not a sentence. In fact, they are a window, and windows close. So do the 10 minutes version. So do the 10 minutes version this morning, right? Open your last three health checkups, put your HbA1c side by side, find your triglycerides, match it with your HDL, and see whether anything has actually measured your fasting insulin. Now, to be real with you, this is not a health plan. This is just finally reading what your body has been telling you, right? And two things before I go. If you want a more detailed diagnosis of that situation, right, which means that you are already doing a lot of what I've said and still not seeing the kind of improvement you want to in your reports, then comment the word growth below this. Right, my team will set up a call with you. We will go through exactly what is happening in your case and where it can be improved and optimized. Not a general answer, but we will curate this particularly for your situation. And if you're curious about the first thing on that list, which is how can you build more storage for sugar? How can you actually build muscle after 40? That is what we're going to be covering on the next slide. How training after 40 is different from training in your 30s, what you have to change, and most importantly, what you have to stop doing. Now, this is actually the most critical part people miss. But once you understand this, it's also critical to understand what improvements you can realistically expect in a particular time frame. So, if that is the part you want, be here for the next live, and I will see you then. You have a good day.